The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, met with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg at the WEF in Davos. Zelensky thanked the organizations for its continued support. This is all well and good, but what are the things that these politicians refrain from addressing in public? According to Bloomberg, the U.S. will try to force Ukraine to give up on the offensive and start fighting defensively. On Biden's behalf, the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will pass this message on to the Ukrainian president. This isn't the first time that we're hearing that Washington is taking up a more conservative strategy in response to Ukraine's failed counteroffensive. Such an approach does not bode well when we also factor in the shortage of U.S.-supplied armaments. Zelensky uses every international opportunity to try to prove that making peace with an aggressor will only lead to more aggression. Some Western politicians are on his side. For example, the Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, who citing the Estonian intelligence data, claims that Russia will need 3 to 5 years to revive its military threat to NATO's borders if a ceasefire were to be brokered in Ukraine. According to Kallas, Russia needs a pause to regain its composure, strength, and resources. Talon's calls can be summed up as such: don't let this conflict get frozen, or the war will expand in scope. The German newspaper Bild published a potential scenario conceptualized by the German armed forces in which Russia may attack the Baltic states as early as this February. Finally, the commander-in-chief of the Swedish military, Mikael Boeden, recently stated that the people of Sweden should start preparing for a large-scale war. Alarmism? We will ask Jaap de Hoop Scheffer, former Secretary General of NATO, who is joining us live on TV Rain. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Hello. Hello.
Do you foresee the war expanding in scope, or in other words, is there a real threat to NATO emanating from Russia at the moment? What do you think, Mr. Scheffer?
Absolutely. Russia is a threat, and Prime Minister Kallas is right when she states that Putin has the time. Putin has elections coming up, so he might well wish to show off his military might in the run-up to the elections. So, in my opinion, the West, meaning primarily the United States of America and Europe, will have to take themselves and Ukraine extremely seriously and go on, not be complacent where it concerns the full support of Ukraine economically, financially, and primarily by providing Ukraine with ammunition and sophisticated weapons.
Mr. Scheffer, when Kaja Kallas talks about 3 to 5 years as a time frame, how realistic would you say this prognosis is? I already mentioned the publication in Bild, which stated that a Russian invasion of the Baltic states was imminent. How would you respond to that? Do you think Putin and the Russian army possesses such capabilities right now?
Well, I've no crystal ball, of course, but I see that Russia, to a large extent, has made the change in essential production areas to a war economy. Now, Putin can do that much more easily than we in the West can do it, because now speaking as a European, the European DNA is peace and not war. And that's the reason that in our Western European democracies, it is difficult to get the right kind and type of equipment, military equipment to Ukraine. Russia can do a lot of harm as we speak, but again, Putin has the time. When I was NATO Secretary General, the Taliban in Afghanistan always told us, it's a well-known expression by now, you have a watch, but we have the time. And Putin knows that democracies, every 4 years they have elections. We have a Gaza war. We have presidential elections in the United States. We have a potential crisis over Taiwan. We, as Europeans, have to take ourselves seriously and see that Ukraine and the support for Ukraine remains top of our priorities.
You know, as luck would have, bad luck that is, Vladimir Putin just made a statement. Here's what he said, I quote, "Russian people are being thrown out of Baltic states, which directly concerns the national security of our country." I realize that this is just a huge coincidence, and neither could have foreseen this, but I just wanted to reiterate. Russian people are being thrown out of Baltic countries, which directly concerns the national security of our country. Should such statements from the Russian leader be taken as threats to the Baltic states?
It is part of a well-known Russian strategy, and Putin repeats what he said many times before, that he will always come to the assistance wherever Russians are under pressure. Now, we all know that specifically in Estonia and Latvia, there are cities with a lot of Russian speakers, problematic situations from time to time. I do not see any immediate threat for the Baltic nations, for the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. But, and here comes a very important but, if we don't stop Putin in Ukraine, we should realize that the Baltic states and Georgia and Moldova are also on his wish list. He wants his empire back, and the Baltic states very much are in his definition of his empire. They are NATO nations, so NATO will come to their assistance in all practical ways whenever there would be a crisis, let alone aggression against one of the Baltic states. But it is clear that there is tension, and that Putin will try to raise that tension wherever he can and whenever he can.
When you say that NATO will surely support its members in the case of an invasion, I'm sure that everyone, including Putin, understands that. But is the organization doing enough right now, as we speak, while the war has not yet spread to NATO territory? Is the organization doing enough to support Ukraine? And you're saying that military support should not be reduced, but don't you think it should increase? Shouldn't NATO countries, especially the US, deliver on the weapons that Volodymyr Zelensky has requested?
Yes, I think that is a necessity, both for the United States of America and for the European nations. You know, these weapons delivery are not in the NATO domain. Not to give Putin an excuse that NATO is waging a war against Russia. But I do very much agree with those who say that I would like to see the ATACMS. I would like to see Germany finally deciding about the Taurus long-range cruise missile, and go on providing Ukraine with the weapons it needs for its defense. That is crucial. But again, I do see many other priorities. And I think that if the European Union pretends to be a geopolitical player, that becomes a bit of a hollow phrase if the European Union and Europe is not capable and able to have a consensual regional policy. I mean, the central problem of the European Union and of NATO was already in my days quite some time ago now. There is no common threat perception about Russia. Not in NATO and not in the European Union, and that makes things very complicated and very difficult, and that makes Jens Stoltenberg's position, the Secretary General, to a complicated one, because he, of course, is the face of an alliance of now 31 countries. Some of them have a different threat perception than others about Russia's intention. I mean, everybody agrees, of course, about Russia's blatant aggression against Ukraine, waging war against Ukraine and in Ukraine. So we should now do what is necessary, and that is A, provide Ukraine a path to EU membership, B, see that we deliver the weapons Ukraine needs, and finally show wherever we can political solidarity with Ukraine and support Ukraine whenever we can.
If President Volodymyr Zelensky, as well as the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian military, Valery Zaluzhny, were to ask for your advice, what would you tell them, the two people in charge of Ukraine's future?
My recommendation would be that A, they are the president of the sovereign state of Ukraine, whose sovereignty is attacked and violated in a very serious way. So I would continue on the political path, and look. I mean, we're discussing weapons and sophisticated weapons. If the West is not further prepared to do what is necessary as far as weapons delivery to Ukraine are concerned, we in the same West should not be surprised that Ukraine can't maintain its offensive posture. And that is a tricky conclusion. And Ukraine and the West would find themselves in a tricky position, because I can assure you that Xi Jinping in Beijing is closely watching how the Americans and the Europeans handle, quote unquote, the war in Ukraine. And if we leave Ukraine alone, then I think, given the time Putin has, if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, to further his reinstalling of the Russian Empire by force, by military force, then I think we could say bye-bye to the Europe we have known for generations, because we have brought success to the aggressor, and the aggressor will go further than he has gone up till now.
Mr. Scheffer, would you advise President Zelensky to begin negotiations with Russia?
It is up to them to decide, and not up to me to decide. And I see that Russia is occupying what is it, around 1/5 of Ukrainian territory. So I can very well imagine that President Zelensky and the general will not say let's negotiate. I have not seen willingness from the Putin side, from the Russian side, to negotiate. So I'm not going to give them recommendations. What we can conclude, you and I, is that all wars at a certain stage they end. And all wars end by people going to sit around the table. But both parties, and I speak for Ukraine now, Ukraine, of course, is not going to sit around the table with the Russians and say, oh, Mr. Putin, Mr. President, here you have 1/5 of Ukrainian territory, and let's leave it at that. That is not conceivable to me under present circumstances.
In conclusion, I have to quote another statement made by Vladimir Putin. Ukraine has refused to negotiate with Russia. Dumbasses. It could have all been over. Direct quote from the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin.